The people diving for sea cucumbers accidentally found this.
Absolutely accidentally.
This shipwreck, 1,200 years, all of this stuff was sitting 50 feet underwater, and it wasn't found until late 1990s?
Absolutely, about 15 years ago. You know, what's amazing about this shipwreck, 60,000 objects, about 55,000 of which were ceramic vessels like what you see here. You know, this actually gives you insight into mass trade that was happening in the 9th century between China and the Persian Gulf.
Tell me a little bit about the painting on each little plate here.
When you look at these bowls, they're all very similar. And in terms of their shape, the firing, the basic design, they're all the same type of bowl.
Right.
But you don't want to just have a plain bowl in your house. You want to have some decoration. And I can imagine that the people who were running the kiln, they probably said, look, we need to get some decorative patterns in here. So let's draw some birds. You look at these birds, and they're absolutely fantastic because each one looks different. And that's because you had individual artists doing this, and quite honestly, they were probably doing it very quickly. So you have some that are done very well, very intricately. My favorite one?
Yes.
It's right here.
Really? This one here? And why is that your favorite?
It's done so badly. I personally think that if I'm reincarnated, that was my person beforehand. I did that one. I just have this crazy idea that you had a painter who held the brush in his toes and actually did it with his toes just as a way of saying, look, I can paint just as well with my toes as my hands.
Okay, this is all creative license at this point.
Look, it's so bad.
I know, it's true. Maybe it was his first day. He said, let me see if I can paint one of these birds, right?
I think painters are better than that.
Take me back, Henry, to this time in the 9th century. Give me a little context about this shipwreck.
We believe that this shipwreck happened sometime in the 2nd quarter of the 9th century. Okay. We know this actually because one of the pots, one of the vessels, has a date on it, which effectively dates it to about the year 826 AD.
Wow.
So sometime after that point, the ship went down. What we think is happening is that an Arab ship, what we call a dhow, made its way from the Persian Gulf to China. And it loaded up on a massive cargo of ceramics, as well as silks and foodstuff and other things. And it was pretty much as it was making its way down from China, making its way through the Straits of Malacca, that it foundered. And then it laid there undiscovered for 1,200 years.
1,200. It's mind-blowing.
And the one thing, of course, to remember is that, you know, we think about this cargo as a valuable cargo that went down. There's also a human element to it.
Of course.
Imagine the people whose family were in charge of the vessel. They wouldn't have come back after one season. Another season goes, maybe 3 seasons go, and then they realize they're never coming back.
It's mind-blowing. I also am fascinated by the rolling pin. Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, in this shipwreck, we not only had cargo that came from China, but we also had a number of items that were related to the crew of the ship. Things that they themselves would have carried with them. We have little burners that they would have used to cook their food on. Incense containers that they would have probably burned some incense just to drive away the smell of people who probably were traveling too long.
Yes.
But we also have what I find an absolutely fantastic rolling pin. And again, you have to imagine on board a ship, you have to prepare food at some point.
Yes.
You're not just fishing all the time, but you'll probably want to make some sort of bread type stuff. We have actually grinding stones, so they would have taken grains, ground them down, perhaps made them into a paste or some way of making them into a bread-like substance. The rolling pin would have been there as part of that. And it's absolutely fantastic because this is the stuff of everyday life.
Is there anything else that you feel is very shocking about this discovery?
Well, for me, some of the most astonishing things are the volume, the size of it, and that's what you see in the display cases here. But we also have a number of just outstandingly fine pieces that were part of the cargo. What you see here is actually very commonplace stuff.
Right.
But we also have gold vessels, silver bowls. There are also some higher class wares, what we call celadon type vessels, which truly must have been the ones that the upper class wanted to use. You mentioned the Ming period. This is a good half millennium beforehand. Stoneware with blue paint on it.
Yes.
This may be the earliest examples you have from China, but there are predecessors of this that were actually coming from Iraq, from the city of Basra, easily 100 years beforehand. And so if you want to know where the origins of Chinese blue and white come from, look actually to the Abbasid period and to Iraq of a period even earlier than this.
No way.
You know, originally you had these very simple white stoneware vessels that came from China. In Iraq, they then start copying them using a tin glaze technique. Then they apply the blue paint to it and have fish and other designs and floral designs made that way. Then the Chinese imitate it.
Wow,
So there's
it's
a
like
continuous back and forth.
we see these worlds as vacuums back then, but there was so much cross-pollination. It's really fascinating.
Absolutely. Cross-cultural exchange, I think, is just part of human nature. And yet we think of it as such a modern experience today.
I know. What about that guy there?
Well, now you've come across one of the most valuable of the cargo. This octagonal cup is without question one of the most intriguing of all the objects in the collection. It's not, in my eyes, so much Chinese as it's something that's much more akin to what's being done by Scythians and people out in the steppes and a little bit further west of China itself. The fact that it's in this cargo is probably indicative of the fact that there were other types of objects that made their way onto the ship. You know, we do have some objects in this cargo which date to the 1st century AD. It would have been one of many ships that did this.
Yeah, it's fascinating, really incredible. A great, fascinating view, really, just from this shipwreck of how much Chinese pottery can tell you about cross-pollination, about really commerce of the time, that they knew they had a market that they could ship things to, so they adapted. I can see all of these really being a snapshot of that time, but also now.